The school bell rang, echoing through the small town like a call that brought children rushing in from all directions. It was an ordinary day for most students, but for one boy, it was a day that would stay in his memory forever. He was the son of a poor black farmer, a quiet boy with big dreams and worn-out shoes. His father had always told him, "Education will change your life. These books will carry you further than the fields ever could." Those words gave him strength every morning, even when his stomach ached from hunger or when the other children laughed at his simple clothes. He carried his books close to his chest like treasures, because in his eyes, they were the only treasures his family had. That morning, as he walked into the classroom, he felt the weight of many eyes on him. Some children whispered and pointed, while others looked away. He had grown used to it. He always sat at the back of the class, quietly listening, writing down every word, as if knowledge itself was his best friend. But on this day, something was different. The principal himself walked into the room, his shoes shining and his face hard as stone. He scanned the class and stopped at the boy. A cold smile spread across his lips, and everyone went silent. "Stand up," the principal said sharply. His voice cut through the air like a knife. The boy's hands trembled, but he stood. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the floor, afraid to meet the principal's eyes. "You don't belong here," the principal announced, loud enough for every student to hear. "This school is not for boys like you." His words fell heavy, and the classroom filled with uneasy silence. Some children looked at the boy with pity, while others smirked. Enjoying the cruel drama, the boy tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He wanted to say that his father had worked day and night to send him here, that he dreamed of becoming someone who could change his family's future. But the words refused to leave his lips. His silence only made the principal's voice sound louder. "Look at your clothes, your shoes, your background," the principal continued. "This is a place for discipline, for achievement, not for farm boys who will never become anything. You waste a seat that could belong to someone worthy." The boy's chest tightened. He felt every word like a stone hitting his heart. The children's eyes burned holes into his back. He wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. But it didn't. He stood there, small and powerless, while the principal's cruelty washed over him. Finally, the principal's words came like a hammer strike. "You are expelled. Take your things and leave." The boy's legs felt weak, but somehow he moved. He bent down, slowly picking up his books, his only companions. His fingers brushed against the torn covers, and he held them tightly, as if they were his shield. He didn't look at anyone because he didn't want to see their faces. He walked out of the classroom, each step heavier than the last. The hallway seemed longer than ever. Teachers glanced at him, but said nothing. Students peeked from doorways, whispering, but no one dared to help. It was as if the whole world had turned its back on him. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright, almost mocking his pain. He lowered his head and walked down the dirt road that led back to his home. With every step, memories of his father's words returned to him. "Son, you are more than what they say you are. Remember that?" But how could he believe that now? His chest hurt with shame. His dreams, so carefully guarded, now felt like broken glass. He imagined his father's face when he told him what had happened. Would his father be angry? Would he be disappointed? Or worse, would he feel guilty for not being able to give him more? The thought made the boy's eyes fill with tears. Children from the neighborhood saw him walking, clutching his books with shaking hands. Some laughed, some just stared. He wanted to run, but his body was too heavy with grief. Step by step, he carried his humiliation home, each tear falling into the dust beneath his feet. When he finally reached the small wooden house at the edge of the fields, his father was there, repairing a broken tool. He looked up and saw his son's face red, wet, and broken. Without a word, the boy fell into his father's arms. The books slipped from his hands and hit the ground. The father wrapped his arms around him and whispered softly, "Don't cry, son. Sometimes life will break you before it builds you." The boy buried his face in his father's chest, wishing the pain would go away. At that moment, he didn't know that the humiliation he suffered would soon transform into something greater. Something that would shake the walls of the school and change his life forever. But for now, all he could feel was the sting of rejection. The sound of laughter in the hallways and the cruel echo of the principal's words, "You don't belong here." And yet, somewhere deep inside his wounded heart, a small spark refused to die. The boy stepped out of the school gate, and the heavy iron door closed behind him with a loud clang. For the first time, he realized he was no longer welcome there. The place that once held his dreams now felt like a prison that had cast him out. He looked down at his hands, holding those battered books. Their covers torn, their pages yellow, yet they were the only bridge to a better life. He pressed them tightly against his chest, as if afraid someone would snatch them away too. The dirt road stretched endlessly before him, lined with trees that swayed gently in the wind. Normally, he enjoyed this walk home. He would think about the lessons he had learned, the new words, the numbers, and the hope of telling his father that he had done well. But today, his feet dragged as though the earth itself was pulling him down. Every step felt heavier than the last. His classmates' whispers still echoed in his ears. Some had laughed, some had stayed silent, but no one had stood up for him. He replayed the principal's cruel words again and again, like a wound that refused to close. "You don't belong here. You are expelled." The words stung so deeply that he could feel them branded inside his heart. He kept asking himself, what did he do wrong? Was it a sin to be born to a poor farmer? Was it shameful to wear clothes washed too many times, shoes with holes, and to dream of a future beyond the fields? As he walked, a group of children playing by the roadside spotted him. They stopped their game and watched. One of them pointed, whispering to another, and they giggled. He quickly lowered his head, pretending not to see, but the sting of humiliation burned his cheeks. He tightened his grip on his books and walked faster. He wanted to disappear, to hide somewhere no one could see his shame. The sun beat down on him, hot and unforgiving. His throat was dry, but he didn't stop. His father's house was still far, and the road felt longer than ever before. Every step stirred up dust, clinging to his clothes, mixing with the tears that slipped silently down his face. He wiped them away quickly, ashamed even of his own pain. His father had always told him to be strong, to carry himself with dignity no matter what. But how could a child carry the weight of such cruel rejection? When he passed by the small market square, the noise of sellers and buyers surrounded him. People called out prices, bargaining loudly. The boy kept his eyes on the ground, hoping no one would notice him. But an old woman selling fruits recognized him. "Aren't you the farmer's boy?" she asked. He nodded quickly, too afraid to speak, and hurried on. She didn't know what had happened at school, but he feared the entire town would soon know. Secrets never lasted long in a place where everyone's life was connected. The road narrowed as he left the busy market behind. Now it was just him, the sound of birds, and the creak of the old wooden bridge that led toward the fields. The bridge groaned under his weight as he crossed, and he paused for a moment in the middle, staring at the water below. His reflection looked back at him, a boy with tear-streaked cheeks, tired eyes, and clothes that carried the dust of the road. He whispered to himself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong." His voice cracked, and for the first time, he allowed himself to cry freely. But then he remembered his father's words. Every night, after working in the fields until the moon rose, his father would sit by the fire and tell him, "You will not always be a farmer's son. Books will lift you higher than the soil ever can. Those words were the reason he endured the stares, the whispers, and the laughter. They were the reason he never skipped a lesson, no matter how tired he was. He wiped his tears roughly with his sleeve and forced himself to keep walking. Finally, the fields came into view. His father's small hut stood in the distance, surrounded by crops swaying in the breeze. It was a simple home, made of wood and tin, but to him, it was the heart of his world. He could see his father bent over, fixing a broken farming tool. The man's back was strong, but his hands were rough from years of labor. The boy stopped for a moment, afraid. How could he tell his father that he had failed? That he had been thrown out, not for mischief, not for disobedience, but for being poor. As he stood frozen, his father looked up and saw him. The boy's eyes were red, his shoulders slumped, and his steps slow. Instantly, the father dropped the tool and hurried forward. Without asking a question, he knew something terrible had happened. The boy tried to speak, but his lips trembled, and instead, tears poured down again. He collapsed into his father's arms, the books falling onto the ground with a soft thud. His father wrapped him in a strong embrace, his voice steady and gentle. "Don't cry, son. Whatever they said, whatever they did, doesn't define you." The boy sobbed harder, and his father stroked his head. Sometimes life breaks you before it builds you stronger. Today may hurt, but tomorrow may surprise us all. The boy clung to his father, not knowing that tomorrow would indeed surprise not just him, but the entire town, in a way none of them could have ever imagined. The next morning at school. The principal walked through the polished corridors with his head held high. His shiny shoes clicked against the floor, echoing with a rhythm that matched his pride. He carried himself as if he owned not just the school, but the futures of every child who walked inside its gates. His chest swelled when teachers greeted him with nervous smiles. He believed respect was owed to him, not earned. He thought back to the scene yesterday, how he had expelled the farmer's son in front of the entire class. The memory filled him with a twisted satisfaction. In his eyes, he had done the right thing. Discipline, status, order, these were the rules he lived by. And if a poor boy from the fields could not fit into that world, then so be it. He convinced himself that the boy's removal would set an example. He walked into the teacher's lounge, where a few staff members sat quietly. Picking up a cup of tea, he spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You see, this school has standards. We cannot allow every ragged child from the fields to sit next to those who come from good families. Imagine the reputation we would lose if outsiders filled our classrooms." He sipped his tea slowly, letting the words hang in the air. Some teachers exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen the farmer's son work harder than most students. They had noticed how the boy always arrived early, how he read his books with passion, and how he respected his elders. But fear kept them silent. No one wanted to challenge the principal's authority. So they nodded, pretending to agree. Even while guilt prickled at their hearts, the principal mistook their silence for approval. His pride grew larger. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his tie. "Mark my words," he continued. "One day, this school will be known as the finest in the region. Not because of charity cases, but because we produce the best of the best. The rich send their children here for a reason, and it is my job to protect that." He finished his tea, set the cup down, and stood with a self-satisfied smile. In his mind, he was not a cruel man. He was a leader shaping the future. What he did not realize was that the world was about to show him just how fragile pride could be. Meanwhile, students whispered in the hallways. The story of the expulsion had spread quickly. Some children repeated the principal's words, mocking the boy who was gone. Others felt uneasy, wondering if one day they too could be judged not for their efforts, but for where they came from. The schoolyard was filled with talk. But whenever the principal passed by, silence returned instantly. as if fear itself commanded obedience. That morning, he walked across the courtyard, inspecting uniforms, frowning at shoes that weren't polished enough, and scolding a boy for running. Every gesture he made was meant to remind the children who held power. He felt untouchable. In his mind, the farmer's son was forgotten, erased like chalk wiped from a board. But destiny has a way of moving quietly, waiting for the right moment. Even as the principal strutted with pride, thinking yesterday's act had strengthened his authority. The skies were preparing a storm. As the morning wore on, he sat in his office, flipping through files. He wrote notes about which students were excelling and which were failures. He planned meetings with wealthy parents, people he hoped to impress. For him, the school was not about learning, it was about status, about reputation, about feeding the hunger of his ego. The clock ticked slowly, but the principal felt content. Outside his window, the children played, laughed, and shouted. He leaned back, imagining the future. More donations, more recognition. Perhaps even awards for running such a prestigious school. He thought of himself as a man respected by all. Little did he know that respect born from fear crumbles easily, and the louder pride shouts, the harder it falls. That night, as he walked home, he passed the market. People there were talking in hushed tones about something unusual. A stranger had arrived in town, someone powerful, someone connected. The principal paid no attention. He was too busy thinking of his own greatness. He believed tomorrow would be just another day where he ruled the school, where his word was law. But tomorrow was already written differently. The next day, when the sun rose over the quiet fields and the students began gathering at the school, the principal polished his shoes once more, ready to walk with pride. He had no idea that the sound of roaring blades would soon drown out his authority, that the arrival of a billionaire's chopper would shake not only the walls of his school, but also the foundation of his pride. And when the truth came out, his arrogance would be remembered not as strength, but as the very thing that brought him to his knees. The schoolyard was alive with the usual morning chaos. Children laughed, chased each other, and shouted as teachers tried to maintain order. The principal stood near the entrance, inspecting uniforms with his usual stern expression, believing he had complete control over everything that happened inside those walls. He didn't know that fate was about to send him a message so loud it would shake the ground. Beneath his feet, it began with a strange sound. At first, it was faint, like the distant hum of bees. A few children looked up, shading their eyes from the morning sun. "What's that noise?" one boy whispered. The sound grew louder, deeper, heavier, until it no longer felt like noise, but like the sky itself was rumbling. Birds scattered from the trees, flapping wildly in panic. Students stopped their games and stared upward. Teachers paused mid-sentence. The principal frowned, irritated that something dared interrupt his perfect order. The noise swelled into a deafening roar, drowning out every voice. Then, out of the bright sky, a massive helicopter appeared, its blades chopping the air like thunder. The ground vibrated. Dust lifted in spirals. Children screamed, some covering their ears, others clapping with excitement. A chopper. A real chopper. One shouted. None of them had ever seen something so big, so powerful, so close. The machine circled once above the school, its shadow sweeping across the playground like the wings of a giant bird. The principal's face turned pale. His lips pressed into a thin line as he tried to look calm, but his eyes betrayed unease. He had never seen such a helicopter land in their small town, let alone at the schoolyard. What could it mean? Who could it be? The blades slowed as the chopper descended, sending a storm of dust and leaves flying in every direction. Children squealed and covered their eyes, their hair whipping wildly in the wind. Teachers pulled the younger ones back, shouting for them to stay in line. The noise was overwhelming, shaking windows, rattling doors, and sending shivers through the air. Finally, with a heavy thud, the helicopter touched the ground. Its blades kept spinning, blowing the principal's polished suit and scattering his papers into the dirt. He reached out helplessly, trying to grab them, but the wind was too strong. The man who prided himself on control now looked like a small figure trapped in a storm. The door of the chopper swung open. Everyone held their breath. Out stepped a tall figure in a sharp suit, his presence commanding respect instantly. His shoes hit the ground with authority, followed by 2 bodyguards in black. The man's face was calm but serious, his eyes sharp and searching. His mere arrival silenced the entire schoolyard. The children whispered among themselves, their voices trembling with awe. "He looks rich. Who is he? Why is he here?" The principal straightened his jacket quickly, forcing a smile as he marched forward. His heart raced, but he tried to mask his fear with arrogance. Important visitors sometimes came to inspect the school, but never by helicopter, never like this. He assumed it must be a wealthy donor or a government official, and he wanted to appear in control. "Welcome, sir," the principal shouted over the noise, bowing slightly as though rehearsed. "You honor us with your visit." But the billionaire didn't look at him. He didn't even acknowledge his words. His eyes scanned the yard, moving past rows of students, past teachers, past the trembling staff. It was as if he was searching for someone specific. The principal's fake smile faltered. Why wasn't this man paying attention to him? The billionaire stepped forward, ignoring the principal's attempts to speak. His tall frame cut through the crowd like a blade, and students instinctively moved aside. Every step he took felt heavy with power, the kind of power that came not just from wealth, but from presence. He stopped near the gate, looking toward the edge of the yard, where one boy stood silently, clutching old books to his chest, the farmer's son. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Teachers froze, students' eyes widened, and even the principal's jaw dropped. Why would such an important man walk past everyone, past the officials, past the staff, and stop in front of a poor farmer's child? The boy looked up, stunned, as the billionaire approached. Dust still swirled around them, the helicopter's blades slowly coming to rest. But the world seemed to pause in that moment. The boy's heart raced. He had no idea why this powerful man would even notice him. The billionaire knelt slightly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. His voice, calm but firm, carried across the yard. "I've been looking for you." The crowd erupted in whispers. The principal's face turned ghostly white. His pride cracked like thin glass under the weight of confusion and fear. He realized, in that instant, that the decision he made yesterday to throw out the farmer's son in front of everyone was about to come back in ways he could never have imagined. The sound of the helicopter had silenced the school, but the words that were about to be spoken would silence an entire town. The helicopter's blades slowed, the roar fading into a heavy silence that seemed to press against everyone's ears. Dust hung in the air, swirling around the tall figure who had just stepped onto the school grounds. The billionaire stood straight, his suit untouched by the storm that had thrown everyone else into chaos. His presence was like a shadow stretching over the entire yard, commanding, undeniable. The students stared, frozen in place. None of them had ever been so close to a man of such wealth and power. Some had only seen people like him in magazines, on television, or in stories whispered late at night. Yet here he was, standing on their very playground, his eyes sharp and searching. The principal's polished shoes crunched against the gravel as he hurried forward. His fake smile stretched wider, though sweat glistened on his forehead. "Welcome, sir, welcome," he said with a forced laugh, raising his voice so all could hear. "To what do we owe the honor of your—" The man did not answer. He did not even glance at him. Instead, He walked past the principal as though he were no more than a piece of furniture blocking the way. Every step he took seemed to carry weight, and the crowd parted before him like water splitting around a stone. His 2 bodyguards followed closely, their dark sunglasses reflecting the frightened faces of the teachers. The billionaire's gaze swept over the students. Row by row, his expression unreadable. His eyes did not linger on the children in their crisp uniforms, nor on the ones with polished shoes and expensive bags. Instead, he seemed to be searching for someone who didn't fit the picture of wealth. His sharp eyes stopped near the back of the yard, and the tension grew thicker. There, near the wall, stood the farmer's son. His books were pressed tightly against his chest, his shoulders slumped as though he wished to disappear into the stone. Dust from the helicopter still clung to his clothes, making him look even smaller, even poorer. Yet in that moment, with the billionaire's eyes locked on him, he seemed to glow brighter than anyone else. Gasps spread through the crowd. Teachers froze, their mouths slightly open. The children's whispers buzzed like a swarm of bees. Why is he looking at him? That's the boy who got expelled. No, it can't be. The principal's smile faltered. He quickly moved to stand in the billionaire's line of sight, blocking the view. Sir, he stammered, perhaps you are here to discuss donations, or maybe to see our fine facilities. He gestured nervously at the school building, his voice high and strained, but the billionaire brushed past him without a word, his gaze fixed firmly on the boy. His footsteps grew louder in the silence, echoing across the yard. He stopped directly in front of the farmer's son. The boy's heart hammered in his chest. He had no idea what was happening, no idea why such a powerful man would even notice him. He felt the weight of every eye in the school pressing down on him. The billionaire bent slightly, his face softening for the first time. He placed a hand on the boy's thin shoulder, steady and reassuring. Then, with a voice calm but carrying authority, he said words that would stun everyone present. I've come for him. The yard erupted in whispers, gasps, and shocked cries. Teachers looked at one another, confused. Students covered their mouths, unable to believe what they were hearing. And the principal turned pale as chalk. His knees wobbled beneath him. The man he had just insulted, mocked, and thrown out the poor farmer's son was the one this billionaire had come to see. The principal stammered, F for him. But why? His words tripped over themselves, desperate and weak. The billionaire straightened, his sharp eyes finally cutting into the principal. His voice, deep and steady, carried across the yard, because this boy is worth more than your entire pride. More than your polished floors, more than your walls of stone. He belongs here more than anyone. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar of the helicopter. Everyone felt it, the weight of truth crashing against arrogance. The farmer's son stood frozen, unable to believe what he had just heard. He had walked home in shame the day before, his dreams shattered. And now, the most powerful man any of them had ever seen stood at his side, defending him before the entire school. The billionaire glanced down at the boy again, his expression softening once more. Don't be afraid, he said quietly, almost like a father speaking to his child. Today is the start of something greater. Behind them, the principal's world crumbled. He had thought himself untouchable, a ruler within his small kingdom. But in one single moment, with one single act, his authority had been shattered. He stood trembling, humiliated before his own students, his pride exposed for the hollow shell it truly was. And yet, this was only the beginning. The arrival of power was not just about the man who stepped from the chopper. It was about the truth he carried, the connection he revealed, and the storm of change that was about to sweep through the school like nothing they had ever known before. Tomorrow would never be the same again. Asterisk. The air in the schoolyard was thick with silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. The billionaire's words still echoed. "I've come for him." The children stared at the farmer's son as if they were seeing him for the very first time. Yesterday, he had walked out in shame, shoulders bent under the weight of rejection. Today, he stood at the center of something bigger than anyone could understand. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly. He gripped his books tighter, confused and afraid. His mind was racing. Why me? What does this man want with me? He wanted to step back, to hide from all the staring eyes, but the billionaire's steady hand on his shoulder held him in place. The touch wasn't heavy, was reassuring, almost fatherly. As though saying, "You are safe now." The principal's throat went dry. He forced a laugh that cracked halfway. "Sir, perhaps you are mistaken. That boy, he is nobody. Just a poor farmer's son. In fact, I expelled him yesterday for breaking our standards." His words trembled, his voice desperate. But he clung to his pride like a drowning man clings to driftwood. The billionaire's head turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the principal. The look in them made the man shrink instantly. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment, the kind of look that strips away arrogance and leaves only shame behind. His voice, low and controlled, cut sharper than any shout. "You expelled him? Because of his clothes? Because of his father's work? Because he was not born with wealth?" The principal opened his mouth, but no sound came. His lips moved, searching for an excuse, but every eye in the yard was on him. Teachers, students, even the guards. The silence pressed down like a weight, demanding truth. The billionaire straightened and turned back to the boy. His expression softened, but his voice carried across the yard so no one could mistake his words. "This boy," he said, placing his hand over the boy's shoulder again, "is my godson. His father is the man who once saved my life." Gasps exploded like thunder. Children clutched each other's arms. Teachers' jaws dropped. The principal staggered back a step, his face drained of color. The boy's eyes widened in shock. He looked up at the man beside him, unable to believe what he had heard. "Me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Your godson." The billionaire nodded slowly, his eyes kind now. "Yes, years ago, your father helped me when I was no one. I was broken, lost, and he gave me food, shelter, and dignity when he had almost nothing himself. I swore that day I would always repay his kindness. And now, I see his son standing before me, treated like dirt by those who should know better. I will not stay silent." The crowd buzzed with disbelief. Some students whispered, "His father saved a billionaire." Others shook their heads, unable to believe how quickly life could turn. Yesterday, this boy had been mocked for his worn-out shoes. Today, he stood under the protective arm of a man whose wealth could buy the entire town. The billionaire looked directly at the principal, his voice rising with authority. "You talk about standards. But true standards are not measured by uniforms, nor by money, nor by power. They are measured by character. And by that measure, this boy outshines all of you." The principal's knees shook. He tried to bow, tried to stammer an apology, but the words tangled in his throat. His pride, so loud yesterday, now looked small and pitiful in front of everyone. The students who once feared him now looked at him differently, some with disgust, others with pity. The billionaire turned again to the boy. He knelt slightly, so his eyes met the boy's level. "You do not need to be afraid anymore. From today, I will fund your education not just here, but anywhere you wish to study. You will have the chance your father dreamed for you. The world will open its doors to you, and no one will ever close them again." The boy's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes. All his life he had carried the weight of poverty, the shame of being different, the humiliation of being looked down upon. And now, in one single moment, the chains were shattered. His father's sacrifice had not been forgotten. His own dreams were no longer impossible. The students erupted in whispers. Some looked at him with envy, others with awe. But many, for the first time, looked at him with respect. The boy who had been invisible yesterday was now the center of the world. The billionaire stood tall once more, his gaze sweeping the yard. "Let this be a lesson for all of you," he declared. "Never judge a person by what they wear, where they come from, or how much money they have. Greatness often hides where you least expect it." The principal lowered his head, trembling, humiliated in the very place he once held power. The boy's heart beat fast, his tears flowing freely, now not from shame, but from overwhelming hope. He had never imagined such a twist. The sound of the helicopter still echoed faintly in the distance. But the roar that mattered most now was the roar of truth. And, for the first time, the farmer's son stood tall, no longer as an outcast, but as someone the world could no longer ignore. The courtyard of the school was silent. But it wasn't the silence of fear anymore, it was the silence of awe. The dust had settled from the helicopter, yet something heavier hung in the air, the weight of truth. Every student, every teacher, even the janitor standing at the far corner, had their eyes fixed on the boy who yesterday had walked out in shame, and today stood taller than anyone else. The billionaire kept his hand firmly on the farmer's son's shoulder, his presence like a shield of steel. The boy, still trembling, wiped his tears, but this time he did not bow his head. His eyes lifted. For the first time he looked around the courtyard, not with fear, but with courage. The principal stood a few steps away, frozen like a statue. His face was pale, his lips dry. Just yesterday he had shouted at this boy in front of everyone, calling him worthless. Now he was the one who looked worthless, his pride shattered. His authority crumbling like sand in a storm. The billionaire's voice broke the silence. It was steady, deep, and clear, echoing against the school walls. "You call yourself a leader, principal. But a true leader does not crush the weak. A true leader uplifts them. Yesterday, you used your power to humiliate a child for being poor. Today, you will answer for that." The principal's knees wobbled. "I only wanted to maintain standards," he stammered, his voice trembling. The billionaire's eyes narrowed. "Standards. Tell me, what is a school's true standard? Is it the shine of shoes? The wealth of parents? Or is it the hunger in a child's heart to learn? This boy has more discipline, more dignity, and more courage than anyone here. Yet you tried to break him because of his clothes." Whispers spread among the students. Many nodded. Some even looked at the farmer's son with regret, shamed of how they had laughed when he was expelled. The billionaire raised his hand for silence. "Listen carefully, all of you. This boy will not just study here, he will go wherever he wishes. His education will be funded fully by me. And more than that," he turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the courtyard. "From today, this school will never again humiliate a child for being poor. I will personally fund a new scholarship program open to every student who struggles but dreams big. No child will walk out of these gates ashamed again." Cheers broke out among the children. Their faces lit up with hope. Some of them, who had quietly feared being treated like the farmer's son, suddenly felt a new kind of courage in their hearts. The principal's mouth opened, but no words came. His pride, once so loud, was silent now. He tried to step forward, to bow, to beg forgiveness. But the billionaire's eyes held him still. "As for you," the billionaire said firmly, "a man who cannot respect the dignity of a child does not deserve the honor of leading them. Your position as principal ends today." Gasps filled the yard. The teachers looked at one another in shock. The principal staggered, his legs weak, his authority stripped away in a single sentence. Yesterday, he thought himself powerful, untouchable. Today, his arrogance had destroyed him. He covered his face with his hands and turned away. Unable to bear the eyes of his students, the boy clutched his books tighter, not out of fear, but out of pride. His tears flowed again, but this time they were tears of hope. He turned to the billionaire, his voice small but steady. "Thank you. But I don't want this only for me. There are other children here, just like me. They need a chance too." The billionaire's lips curved into the faintest smile. "And they shall have it. Your words prove exactly why your father raised you to be strong. You are not only his son, you are his legacy." The students broke into applause, their voices rising like a wave. Some cheered his name, others clapped until their hands hurt. The farmer's son, who had once been invisible, had become a symbol of hope. As the applause filled the air, the billionaire guided the boy toward the helicopter. The crowd parted, bowing their heads in respect, not out of fear, but out of admiration. The boy looked back once at the school. The same walls that had once witnessed his humiliation now stood as the backdrop of his triumph. The helicopter blades began to turn again, the wind whipping through the courtyard. Dust rose, but this time it didn't blind anyone. It carried with it the promise of change, and as the machine lifted into the sky, carrying the boy and the man who had come for him, the schoolyard buzzed with whispers, not of cruelty, but of wonder. The children would never forget what they had seen. Teachers would never again stay silent in the face of injustice. And the principal's name would forever be remembered, not as a symbol of power, but as a warning of how pride falls. The farmer's son, once humiliated, had become the voice of a lesson greater than any written in books. Never judge a person by what they wear, where they come from, or how much money they have. Respect is not bought, it is earned. And that lesson, planted deep in the hearts of everyone there, would grow stronger with every passing day.